Clara Bennett pressed her last coin against the counter with a trembling hand, knowing that by sundown she would have no home, no money, and nowhere left to turn. And that was the moment a dusty, road-worn cowboy walked through the door, dropped a gold coin in front of her, and said 4 words that stopped every heartbeat in that store. "Marry me, Miss Bennett." If you've ever been counted out, overlooked, and left with nothing, this story is for you. Subscribe to this channel, follow along until the very end, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1884 came to Red Hollow, Montana, like it always did, hot, dry, and indifferent to whoever it burned. Clara Bennett had been awake since before the rooster made a sound. She sat at the small table in the back room of Harding's General Store, her sewing kit open in front of her, her fingers working through the last set of alterations on a dress that wasn't hers. She'd been taking in mending work for 3 months, ever since her mother passed in April, and left her with nothing but a rented room, a small debt to the landlord, and the particular kind of silence that follows a person everywhere after they've lost the last person in the world who truly knew them. She wasn't crying. She'd stopped crying sometime around the 2nd week of May, when she realized that tears didn't stretch $1 and grief didn't pay rent. She finished the hem, folded the dress neatly, and stood. Owen Harding was already behind the counter when she walked out of the back room, a thick man with a short temper and an eye for ledgers. He looked at the dress she placed on the counter, then at her, then back at the dress. "That's 3 days late," he said. "The thread you gave me snapped twice," Clara said. "I had to rework the seam." "I'm not paying for your trouble, Miss Bennett. I'm paying for the dress." She kept her expression even. "The work is done, and done right." He picked up the dress, turned it over with the care of a man examining livestock, and dropped 2 coins on the counter. Not 3. 2. Clara looked at the coins. She looked at him. "We agreed on 3, she said. "We agreed on 3 days. You took 6. He didn't even look up from his ledger. 2. Take it or leave it." She took it. She didn't have the luxury of principles today. She tucked the coins into the small cloth purse she kept inside her apron pocket and walked to the far end of the counter where she'd left her list. Flour, salt, a small piece of soap if she could manage it. She did the arithmetic the way she always did, fast, quiet, without moving her lips. She came up 40 cents short of what she needed. She stood there for a moment, list in hand, and let herself feel the full weight of it. Not in a way that anyone watching could see, just the way a person does when they're very tired and very alone, and starting to understand that there is no bottom to how difficult things can get. The door of the general store opened behind her. She didn't turn around. People came and went all morning. She was already starting to calculate which items she could cut from her list when she heard it. Not the sound of the door, not the sound of footsteps, but the sudden, absolute quiet that fell over the room. She turned. How was tall? That was the first thing. Taller than most men in Red Hollow, and broader in the shoulders, with the kind of build that comes from actual labor rather than conversation. His coat was canvas, worn dark at the elbows, and his boots were so covered in trail dust that it was impossible to tell what color they'd started out. The hat was pulled low. She couldn't see much of his face, just the line of a jaw, the shadow of short dark beard, and a pair of eyes that moved across the room, the way a man's eyes do when he's spent years in open country and learned to read spaces before he enters them. How was nobody? That was the second thing. Nobody in Red Hollow knew who he was, and by the looks exchanged between the 2 women near the dry goods shelf, he wasn't expected. He walked to the counter. Owen Harding straightened like he'd been caught at something. The stranger didn't speak to Harding. He turned his head slow and deliberate and looked directly at Clara. She held her ground. She'd been looked at by men before, looked through, looked past, looked at like a problem to be solved. This was different. He wasn't assessing her the way Harding assessed the dress. He was looking at her the way a person looks at something they already know the value of. It made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't immediately name. He reached into his coat. The room seemed to hold its breath. He set a single gold coin on the counter between them. The coin sat there catching the light from the window, entirely out of place among the flour dust and penny goods. "Marry me," he said. Clara stared at the coin, then at him, then back at the coin. Someone near the dry goods shelf made a sound, half surprise, half laughter, quickly muffled. Owen Harding had gone very still, his pen hovering above his ledger. The two women by the shelf whispered to each other without bothering to whisper quietly. Clara set her list down on the counter with great care. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't believe I heard you correctly." "You heard me," the man said. His voice was low. Not unkind, but not soft either. It was the voice of someone who had no particular interest in being misunderstood. "Marry me, Miss Bennet." She felt the back of her neck prickle. "You know my name." "I do." "We've never met." "No, ma'am, we haven't." "Then I'll ask you the same thing. I'd ask any man who walked through that door and said what you just said to a woman he's never met." She looked at him straight. "What in the world makes you think that's a reasonable thing to do?" He didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He reached up and took his hat off, a gesture so old-fashioned that it might have been funny if the rest of him hadn't been so completely serious, and held it against his chest. "My name is Ethan Callahan," he said. "I have a ranch in the mountains north of the Canyon Road. I'm 38 years old. I've been living alone on that property for 4 years, and I need a wife. Not a housekeeper. Not someone to cook and be quiet. A partner." He paused. "I was told you're honest, you work hard, and you don't take what isn't yours. Those things matter to me." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Who told you that?" she asked. "Doc Alderman." She blinked. Franklin Alderman was the only doctor in Red Hollow, a quiet man of 60, who had tended her mother through her last illness and refused to submit a full bill, knowing Clara couldn't pay it. "Franklin Alderman told a stranger to come propose marriage to me," she said flatly. "He said you needed options," Ethan said. "And I need someone I can trust. He said you were the same person." He looked at her without blinking. "He wasn't wrong about either part." "He might not be wrong," Clara said. "That doesn't mean he was right." "No," Ethan agreed. "It doesn't." The women by the dry goods shelf had given up all pretense of shopping. One of them, Martha Greer, who ran the millinery 3 doors down, and was the most reliable distributor of opinion in Red Hollow, was watching with the focused attention of someone who expected to report this conversation in full detail before noon. Clara was very aware of this. She was also very aware of the coin sitting on the counter between them, and of the 40 cents. She was short on her own shopping, and of the rent that would be due in 11 days, which she could not pay. She picked up the coin, turned it over once in her fingers, set it back down. "I don't know you," she said, "and I don't accept proposals from men I don't know. That's not desperation or pride, that's plain sense." She looked at him. "But I'll have a conversation with you. If you want to sit down somewhere and tell me what it is you're actually asking, I'll listen." Something crossed his face. Not surprise exactly. More like relief, though he covered it quickly. "That's fair," he said. "It is," she said. "And fair is the only way I do business, Mr. Callahan." He nodded once. Put his hat back on. They left Owen Harding with his mouth slightly open and his pen still hovering, and they walked out of the general store and into the summer heat of Red Hollow's Main Street, and Martha Greer watched them go with the expression of someone who had just been handed the best material she'd had in years. They sat at the far end of the long porch outside Alderman's office, where the doctor kept 2 wooden chairs for patients who needed air. Ethan sat with his forearms on his knees and his hat in his hands. Clara sat straight, hands folded, and waited. "Ask what you want to ask," he said. "How long have you been in Red Hollow?" she said. 3 days. "Where did you come from before that?" "I wintered in Butte. Before that, the ranch." "This ranch," she said. "The one in the mountains." "Yes." "And it's a working ranch." "It is." "Cattle." "Cattle and horses. Some of both." She looked at him. His boots were trail-worn, his coat was old, and there was nothing about him, not the hat, not the belt, not the shirt that suggested money. "How many head?" she asked. He looked up at her. "Enough," he said. That was a non-answer, and they both knew it, and he didn't look embarrassed by it. She filed that away. "You said partner," she said. "What does that mean to you specifically?" He thought about it. She appreciated that he didn't answer immediately. "It means decisions made together," he said. "It means if something goes wrong with the property, you know about it. It means if something goes wrong with you, I know about it. It means neither one of us is working in the dark. And if I disagree with you, then you say so. And you listen." "I try to." A pause. "I'm not perfect at it." "That's an honest answer," she said. "I try to be honest," he said, "even when it's inconvenient." She looked at him for a moment. "Why me?" she said. "Red Hollow isn't a large town, but there are other women here. Women who might be easier to convince. Women who might ask fewer questions." He was quiet for a beat. "I know." "Then why me?" He looked at his hat for a moment, turning it in his hands. "I watched you," he said. "Not in a way meant to alarm you. I mean, I was in this town for 3 days before I walked into that store. And in those 3 days, I saw how you handled yourself, the way you spoke to people, the way you didn't ask for what you weren't owed, the way you looked at other people's trouble like it mattered even when you were dealing with your own." Clara said nothing. "I saw you stop and talk to Widow Ferris on Tuesday," he said. "The woman who's been sitting on her porch since her son left for California. You brought her a piece of bread wrapped in cloth, and you sat with her for 20 minutes, even though you were clearly on your way somewhere else." Clara looked away. "That's not nothing," he said. "That's the kind of person I'd trust." "That's a high bar to clear on 3 days of watching," she said. "Maybe," he said. "I've been wrong before, but I don't think I'm wrong this time." She stood up. She wasn't ready to give him an answer, not today, not here. But she had something to say, and she wanted to say it standing. "I'll think about it, Mr. Callahan," she said. "But if this goes any further, I want to be very clear about something. I'm not a woman who can be bought. Not with a gold coin, not with a ranch, not with anything else you might have. If I marry a man, it's because I believe in who he is, not what he owns." She looked at him steadily. "Are we clear on that?" He stood. He was a full head taller than her. He looked down at her without any of the condescension that men his size sometimes carried without knowing it. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "We're clear." She nodded. She walked off the porch and back into the street. She didn't let herself exhale until she was halfway to the boarding house. Martha Greer had already begun her work. By the time Clara sat down to her evening meal, a small bowl of corn porridge and a piece of cornbread she'd made last night, there wasn't a woman in Red Hollow who didn't know about the stranger in the general store and the gold coin and the proposal. The landlady. Mrs. Pullman set Clara's bowl down with the energy of a woman who had been waiting all afternoon to speak. "A cowboy," she said, pulling out the chair across from Clara without being invited to sit. "A drifter from what I hear." "He has a ranch," Clara said. "That's what he says. He gave me no reason to doubt it." Mrs. Pullman pressed her lips together. "Clara, I'm saying this as someone who knew your mother. A man who rides into a town where he's not known, proposes marriage to a woman on the same day. He meets her and leaves with a gold coin on the counter. That is not a respectable man. That is a man with designs." "What kind of designs?" Clara asked. "I couldn't say." "Then perhaps it's better not to say," Clara said. Mrs. Pullman sat back. "You're going to consider it." "I'm going to think clearly about my situation," Clara said. "Which is what a woman with 40 cents and $11 rent bill and no family left does." Mrs. Pullman was quiet for a moment. Then she said more gently, "There are other ways, Clara." "Name one," Clara said. "Name one that doesn't involve me losing this room and starting over from nothing." Mrs. Pullman said nothing. Clara picked up her spoon. They ate the rest of the meal without speaking. She couldn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed in the narrow room and listened to the building settle in the heat, and she thought about Ethan Callahan's hands, how still they'd been resting on his hat, not restless, the way men's hands get when they're hiding something. She thought about the way he'd said partnership, not transaction, without actually using those words. She thought about Franklin Alderman, who had never once steered her wrong. She thought about her mother's last words, not poetic ones, not the kind from stories. Her mother had been practical to the end. She'd taken Clara's hand and said, "Don't let pride be the thing that undoes you, baby girl. Pride is a luxury. Discernment is what keeps you alive." Clara stared at the ceiling. Pride and discernment. The trick was knowing the difference. She made up her mind somewhere near midnight. She found him at the livery the next morning. He was brushing down a horse, a bay mare well-muscled with the particular calm that came from being handled consistently by the same pair of hands. He didn't stop brushing when he heard her come in, but he tilted his head so she knew he knew she was there. "I'll come with you," she said. "Not as your wife, not yet. But I'll come and see the ranch and I'll make a decision based on what I see." She crossed her arms. "I have 3 conditions." He kept brushing. "All right. First, I ride my own horse. You don't put me in a wagon like cargo." "I have a spare mare," he said. "She's good-tempered." "Second, if at any point I decide this isn't what I want, I come back. No argument, no pressure. I come back and we part ways with no bad blood." "Agreed." "Third," she paused, "you tell me the truth. Not just the things you think I need to know. All of it. Whatever I ask." He stopped brushing. He turned and looked at her for a moment. "I'll do my best," he said. "That's not good enough," she said. Another pause, longer this time. "All right," he said. "The truth. Whatever you ask." She nodded. "When do we leave?" "This afternoon," he said. "If that suits." "It suits," she said. She turned to walk out. "Miss Bennet." She stopped. "Thank you," he said, "for giving it a chance." She didn't turn around. "Don't thank me yet, Mr. Callahan. I haven't decided anything." She walked out into the summer heat, and behind her, she heard him go back to brushing the horse. The town watched them leave. Clara had packed what she owned in a single canvas bag, which was not difficult because she owned very little. She'd paid Mrs. Pullman for the remainder of the current week, which cleaned out her purse, and she'd told her she wasn't certain when she'd be back. Mrs. Pullman had looked at her the way a person looks at someone standing too close to the edge of something. But she'd pressed Clara's hand and said, "Be careful," and Clara had nodded, and that was that. They rode out of Red Hollow just after 2 in the afternoon. The spare mare was exactly as Ethan had described, well-tempered, smooth-gaited, easy in the mouth. Clara hadn't ridden in over a year, but the mare was patient with her, and it came back faster than she expected. She settled into the saddle and let the rhythm take over. For the first hour, they didn't talk much. The road out of Red Hollow moved north through flat summer grass before it began to rise toward the canyon country, and Ethan rode slightly ahead, reading the trail the way experienced riders do, not looking directly at obstacles, but seeing them anyway, adjusting his line without drama. He wasn't showing off. He was just moving the way a man does when a country is as familiar to him as the back of his own hand. Clara watched him. She'd learned to read people the way her mother had taught her, not by what they said, but by what they did when they thought no one was paying attention. He stopped twice on that first stretch of road. Once to move a section of fallen fence rail off the path, not his fence, not his land, just cleared it and rode on without comment. Once to water the horses at a creek crossing, and while the horses drank, he crouched down at the bank and looked at the water for a moment, in the way of someone checking something he always checked. "What are you looking at?" Clara asked. "Water level," he said. "It's been dry this summer, lower than it was last year." "Is that a problem for the ranch?" "It can be." He stood. "We have 2 springs on the upper property that haven't run dry in 40 years. But below the tree line the creeks are struggling. Does that worry you?" He looked at the water for another second. "Everything about a ranch worries you," he said. "That's part of it." He turned and went back to his horse. The trick is knowing which worries to act on and which ones to just watch. She filed that away too. They made camp at the edge of the canyon country as the sun dropped. Ethan had a lean, efficient way of setting up camp, no wasted motion, no hesitation, that told Clara this was something he'd done many hundreds of times. He built a small fire, made coffee in a blackened tin pot, and produced from his saddlebag a cloth-wrapped package of bread-dried meat, and 2 hard-boiled eggs. He handed her half without ceremony. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." They ate by the fire. The canyon wall rose black against the darkening sky to the north of them, and above it, the first stars were starting to come through. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said. "You can ask me anything," he said. "You said you needed someone you could trust. And I understand what you mean by that functionally, I mean. You need a partner for the ranch, someone reliable." She looked at the fire. "But you went to Franklin Alderman. You asked a doctor who he'd recommend. Not a neighbor, not a friend, not a family member." She looked at him. "Why a doctor?" Howe was quiet for a moment. "Franklin Alderman doesn't lie," he said. "To anyone. I've met people who lie to their doctor so they can feel better about their choices. Alderman makes that hard. He asks the kind of questions that make it difficult to be anything but honest. And you trust his judgment." "I trust that he sees people clearly," Ethan said. "Better than most." "Better than you?" she asked. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile. "I've been wrong about people before," he said, "in ways that mattered." "What kind of ways?" Hay was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "There was a woman," he said 4 years ago, "before I came back to the ranch. I thought she was honest. I thought she wanted the same things I wanted. I was wrong about what she wanted." He looked at the fire. "When I found out I was wrong, I went back to the land. And I've been careful since." "Careful," Clara said. "Or closed." He looked at her then. It was the most direct look he'd given her all day, and it landed somewhere between her sternum and her spine. "Maybe both," he said. She nodded. She looked back at the fire. "I'm not her," she said, in case that needed saying. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm here." The second day of riding took them up into the mountain country. The air changed as the elevation rose cooler, cleaner, carrying the scent of pine and something faintly mineral from the rock faces. The trail narrowed in places and widened in others, and Ethan knew every turn of it without looking at the ground, leading them with the steady confidence of a man who had ridden this path more times than he could count. They stopped at midday, at a flat shelf of rock, with a view south, back over the canyon country they'd come through. Clara looked out at the distance, and felt for the first time since they'd left Red Hollow, something she wasn't quite ready to name. Not peace. More like the particular feeling of being far enough from everything familiar that the weight of it couldn't quite reach you. "It's something," she said. "Yes," he said. He was looking south too. "I grew up seeing that view. Took me a long time to stop taking it for granted." "Did your family have the ranch a long time?" "My father built it," he said. "Started with 1 section of land and 40 cattle. Built it over 30 years. He paused. "He died 6 winters ago. Left it to me." "Were you here when he died?" A beat. "No," he said. She heard something in that single word, not guilt exactly, but its close relative. "That's a hard thing," she said. Not a question, not prying, just an acknowledgement. "Yes," he said. "It was." They rode on. It was late in the afternoon of the second day when something happened that Clara hadn't anticipated, and it was the thing she found herself thinking about long after everything else that followed. They came down a switchback trail into a shallow valley where a small homestead sat a cabin and a lean-to barn, both badly in need of repair. An older man was crouched near the barn's foundation, working at something with a hammer and not making much progress. Ethan pulled up without hesitation. "Hector," he said. The old man looked up. His face cracked into a grin that showed he was missing 2 teeth. "Callahan, didn't know you was coming through." "I'm not on my way back yet," Ethan said. "Few more days." He swung down from the saddle and walked to where the man was working. "What's wrong with it?" "Foundation logs rotted through on the south side," Hector said. "I've been trying to jack it up, but my back ain't what it was." "Hold on," Ethan said. I took his coat off, laid it over the fence rail, and crouched beside the man. Clara watched from her as Ethan examined the problem, said something low to Hector, and then went to his saddlebag for a small tool roll. For the next 45 minutes, without being asked and without offering explanations, he worked on the barn foundation. Hector offered to pay him. Ethan said, "You helped my father shore up the East Corral the year I was born. We're square." The old man looked like he might argue. Then he nodded and let it go. When Ethan came back to his horse and swung up, Clara said nothing. She waited until they'd ridden a quarter-mile north before she spoke. "That wasn't on your way," she said. "No," he said. "You do that a lot." I thought about it honestly. "I try to," he said. "My father always said a neighbor is worth more than almost anything else you can have in mountain country. When things go wrong up here, help doesn't come fast. You rely on the people around you." He looked ahead at the trail. "So you take care of the people around you." Clara rode beside him and thought about what it meant to be someone like that. She was beginning very carefully, and with a great deal of caution, to believe that Ethan Callahan might be exactly what he appeared to be, which was the most dangerous kind of hope she'd allowed herself in a long time. Near evening. On the second day, they crested a long ridge, and Ethan drew his horse to a stop. "Look north," he said. Clara looked. Below the ridge, stretching out through the fold of two mountain flanks, lay a valley. And in that valley, even at this distance, even in the last of the evening light, she could see that something was very wrong. There were cattle, yes, more than she'd expected, many more. And horses. And buildings, a main house, two large barns, outbuildings, fencing that ran in long, deliberate lines across the valley floor. But there was also a rider at the far edge of the property, moving in a way that wasn't the movement of a ranch hand going about his business. It was the movement of someone who wanted to be seen. "Who is that?" Clara asked. Ethan's expression had gone still and careful. "His name is Victor Hayes," he said. "He's been trying to buy this land for the past 2 years. Buy it or take it." A pause. "Both," he said. "Depending on the day." Clara looked at the distant rider. "Does he know you're coming back?" "He knows I left," Ethan said. "He always knows when I'm gone." Something cold moved through her that had nothing to do with the evening air. "And what does he do when you're gone?" she said. Ethan looked at her. His jaw was set. "That's what I'm about to find out," he said. He clicked his horse forward, and they rode down off the ridge toward Callahan Valley as the last of the summer sun hit the peaks above them and the valley below settled into shadow. And Clara Bennett, who had come north expecting to see a modest ranch and make a practical decision, began to understand that she might have ridden into something considerably more complicated than that. She kept her mare steady and rode forward anyway. That, she supposed, was all she could do. They rode into the valley as the last light dissolved behind the peaks. Ethan didn't slow down when he spotted the rider near the fence line. He kept his pace steady and deliberate, the way a man does when he wants it known that he sees what's in front of him and isn't afraid of it. Clara matched his pace. She didn't know enough yet to be afraid, but she knew enough to be alert. The rider was still there when they reached the main gate. A lean man on a pale horse, sitting easy in the saddle arms crossed over the pommel like he had all the time in the world. He was maybe 50, with the kind of weathered good looks that came from spending years outdoors and knowing it. His clothes were better than a working cowboy's. His horse was better than most men in this country could afford. He watched them come through the gate without moving. "Callahan," he said. His voice was pleasant. That was the first thing Clara noticed, how pleasant it was. "Didn't expect you back so soon." "I live here, Hayes," Ethan said. He didn't stop his horse. He rode past the man at a distance of 20 feet and kept moving toward the barn. "You know that." Hayes turned his horse to follow the direction without actually following. He looked at Clara with the measured interest of a man taking inventory. "Who's this?" "None of your business," Ethan said. "Now that's not very neighborly." Hayes smiled. It was a full, easy smile that didn't reach anything above his cheekbones. "I was just passing through, checking on the fence line along the east section. Your boys haven't been keeping it up the way they ought." Ethan stopped his horse and turned in the saddle. "My east fence is fine, Hayes, and you weren't checking on it. You were waiting." "Waiting," Hayes repeated like he was tasting the word. "That's an interesting interpretation." It's the accurate one, Ethan said. Same as it was last month, and the month before. He looked at the man without blinking. You know where the property line is. Be on your side of it. Hayes looked at him for a long moment. The smile stayed in place, but something shifted behind his eyes, something that was used to getting what it wanted and was recalibrating. Then he tipped his hat in Clara's direction. Ma'am, he said, welcome to the valley. He turned his horse and rode south along the fence. Clara watched him go. Who is he? She asked. Victor Hayes, Ethan said. He swung down from his horse and handed the reins to a ranch hand who had appeared from the direction of the barn. He owns the land east of here. He's been trying to push his boundary west for 2 years. By legal means, she said. Ethan gave her a look that answered the question without words. We can talk about it inside, he said. The main house was larger than anything Clara had been picturing. She hadn't let herself picture too much because she'd learned early that expectations were the first thing life came for. But even with that habit of mind firmly in place, she stopped in the doorway for 1 second before she could stop herself. It was a real house. Stone foundation timber frame, a wide front room with a fireplace that had clearly been used hard through many winters. The furniture was old and solid, the kind that gets made once and lasts a lifetime. There were books on a shelf near the window. A rifle hung above the mantel. A work table near the kitchen end held a ledger and inkwell and a small brass clock that was still running. A woman came through from the back of the house, heavy-set gray-haired with the brisk energy of someone who runs a large kitchen and has opinions about it. She looked at Ethan, then at Clara, then back at Ethan. You brought someone, she said. Nora, Ethan said. This is Miss Clara Bennett. She'll be staying in the East Room while she's here. He looked at Clara. Nora Briggs. She keeps the house and most of the sanity on this property. He's not wrong about the sanity, Nora said. She looked at Clara with the direct assessing gaze of a woman who had seen everything and could not be deceived about much. Are you hungry, Miss Bennett? Yes, Clara said. Thank you. Good. Sit down. The both of you look like you've been traveling for 3 days. 2, Ethan said. 2. Nora corrected without apology and disappeared into the kitchen. Clara sat at the long table and looked at the room around her, at the clock, at the books, at the tools hung near the door in the precise order of a person who puts things back where they belong. She thought about the boots she'd seen in Red Hollow. She thought about the worn canvas coat. She thought about the way the whole town had looked at him like he was no one. She looked at Ethan. You let them think you had nothing, she said. He set his hat on the hook by the door. I didn't correct them, he said. That's the same thing. He sat down across from her. Is it? To someone who's being asked to make a decision about you. Yes, she said. It is. He was quiet. He looked at the table. I wasn't trying to deceive you, he said. I know what you wanted, she said. You said it. You wanted to know if a woman would choose you or your land. She looked at him steadily. But there's a difference between testing someone and withholding the truth. One of those is strategy, the other is dishonesty. I know, he said. Do you understand why that matters? Yes, he said. I do. Nora came through with 2 bowls and set them on the table without ceremony. She looked at them both. Them both seemed to decide the conversation was something she didn't need to be part of, and went back to the kitchen. Clara picked up her spoon. I'm not angry, she said. Not yet. But I want you to understand that if I'm going to consider this seriously, any of this, I need you to be straight with me from here on. Everything. Everything, he said. Starting now, she said. He nodded. Starting now. They ate in silence for a while. The food was good, better than Clara had eaten in months, and she let herself simply be grateful for it without analyzing what that gratitude meant. After a while, Ethan said, Victor Hayes has been making a claim on the eastern section of this valley for 2 years. He says the original land survey was wrong, that his family's land extends further west than the boundary line shows. Is he right? Clara asked. No, Ethan said. My father commissioned a federal survey in 1871. The markers are set. Hayes knows exactly where the boundary is. He's been riding up to it and sometimes past it, waiting to see if anyone's going to push back hard enough. And you push back. Every time, he said. But I'm one man. And Hayes has money and lawyers, and the territory court has other things to do. He's been filing documents, creating delays. It's a slow kind of pressure. What does he want? The lower pasture along the creek, Ethan said. It's the best grazing land in the valley, and the creek runs through it year-round, even in dry summers. If he gets that section, he doubles his herd capacity. He looked at his bowl. He's offered to buy it 4 times. The last time he wasn't entirely polite about what would happen if I kept saying no. Clara set her spoon down. How not polite? Ethan looked at her. He suggested that a man living alone on a large property has a lot of points of vulnerability. The words sat between them. And you came to Red Hollow 2 weeks later, Clara said slowly. Something moved across his face. I came to Red Hollow because it was time, he said. But it wasn't nothing to do with Hayes, she said. A long pause. No, he admitted. It wasn't nothing to do with Hayes. She absorbed that. A man living alone on a large, valuable property with no family and a determined enemy who was willing to apply creative pressure. She absorbed it the way she absorbed most difficult information quietly, without showing what it was doing to her. That's something you should have told me before I agreed to come, she said. Yes, he said. It is. Why didn't you? He looked at her. Because I was afraid you wouldn't come. It was the most honest thing he'd said to her since Red Hollow, and it cost him something to say it. She could see that. He wasn't a man who admitted fear easily or at all. She picked her spoon back up. All right, she said. Tell me everything about Hayes, from the beginning. And he did. She was still awake 2 hours after she'd gone to the East Room. The room was clean and plain, a bed, a washstand, a small window that faced north. She lay on top of the blanket in the dark and sorted through everything she'd heard the way her mother had taught her to sort a jumbled sewing basket, not by forcing it, but by letting each piece find its category. Victor Hayes had been buying up property in the valley for 15 years. He'd started small and gotten larger the way men with money and patience always do, quietly, systematically, without ever doing anything that could be cleanly called illegal. He had a lawyer in Helena named Greer, who filed paperwork with the territorial court on a schedule that seemed designed to keep the Callahan property perpetually on the edge of some legal dispute without ever resolving it. The current dispute was over a survey marker that Hayes claimed had been moved. He hadn't proven it. He couldn't prove it. But the claim was enough to cloud the title, and a clouded title made certain things difficult. Financing expansion, and even some of the water rights agreements that were ordinary in the valley. Ethan had been managing it alone. No partner, no lawyer. Just himself and the ledgers, and whatever time he could carve out between running a working ranch and fighting a paper war. Clara stared at the ceiling. She thought, this is a man who needs help, and he's too proud to say that's the main reason he went looking. And then she thought, but he did go looking. That took something. And then more carefully, and he came back with me. A seamstress with 40 cents and a canvas bag, which means either he's desperate or he genuinely believes I'm capable of something. She decided to find out which one it was. She sat up, lit the small candle on the washstand, and started making a mental list. She was at the work table when Ethan came through from the kitchen the next morning. He stopped in the doorway and looked at her, at the ledger open in front of her, at the papers she'd organized into 3 distinct piles, at the pen in her hand. He was already dressed, already had the look of someone who'd been up for an hour. I hope you don't mind, she said. I started with the survey dispute. I wanted to understand the timeline. He came to the table slowly, like he wasn't quite certain what he was walking toward. He looked at the papers. She'd found them in a box under the table. She'd asked Nora where the estate documents were kept, and Nora had given her a look of such combined approval and amusement that Clara had decided she liked her. The survey was done in 1871, Clara said, pointing to the first pile. The original markers are documented here. Hayes filed his first counterclaim in 1882, 11 years later. He waited a long time. He waited until my father died, Ethan said. Exactly. She moved to the second pile. These are his subsequent filings. There's a pattern. He files right before the territorial court's quarterly session, which means the court can't respond until the following quarter. It's not an accident, it's strategy. Someone told him how to do this. Greer, Ethan said. His lawyer, yes. She looked up. Do you have a lawyer? I have a man in Billings who handles the cattle contracts. That's not a lawyer, she said. That's a clerk. He looked at her. I know. You've been fighting a lawyer with no legal representation, she said. I know, he said again. For 2 years. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He had the expression of a man who was accustomed to carrying something heavy, and had just for the first time in a long while put it on the table. I didn't know how to start, he said. The ranch takes every hour I have, and every time I got to the point of writing to someone in Helena, something needed fixing, or the weather changed, or Hayes filed something new, and I had to respond to that first. He kept you reactive, Clara said. Yes. That was the point, she said. Keep you busy defending yourself so you never had time to go on offense. Ethan looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, but the particular look of a person who has been saying something to themselves for a long time, and just heard someone else say it out loud, and realized they were right. Yes, he said quietly. That was the point. Clara looked at the papers. Who else knows about this, in the valley? The ranch hands know there's a dispute. Nora knows most of it. The families on the neighboring properties know Hayes is aggressive. They've dealt with him too. He paused. But I haven't asked anyone for help. Why not? He was quiet for a moment. Because it's my problem, he said. She looked at him. Is that your father's voice or yours? The question landed harder than she'd intended. She could see it. He absorbed it without looking away, but something went tight behind his eyes. Both, he said after a moment. She nodded. She set the pen down. Here's what I think, she said. You came to Red Hollow because Hayes's pressure is escalating, and you need someone in this house. Someone whose presence changes the calculation. A man alone can be pressured in certain ways that a man with a wife and a household cannot. She looked at him squarely. That's part of why I'm here. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. That's part of it. And the other part. He looked at her for a long moment. The other part, he said, is that I've been alone in this valley for 4 years, and I am very tired of it. That answer of all the answers he'd given her was the one she believed most completely. Nora put coffee on the table between them and went back to the kitchen without a word. Clara wrapped her hands around the cup and looked at the papers. We need to write to a real lawyer in Helena, she said. Someone who handles territorial land disputes. And we need to do it this week before Hayes files anything for the next court session. All right, Ethan said. I can draft the letter if you know who to contact. I know a name, he said. A man named Aldrich, Harrison Aldrich. He handled a dispute for the Faraday family 2 valleys over 3 years ago. They won. Send to him, she said. Today if possible. He nodded. He looked at the papers she'd organized. You did this in a few hours, he said. I've been managing accounts since I was 14, she said. My father had a dry goods store. Before he died, I kept his books. After he died, she stopped, picked up the coffee. After he died, I kept other people's books, until that stopped being enough to live on. Ethan was quiet. I'm not telling you that for sympathy, she said. I'm telling you so you understand that I know how documents work, and I know how money works, and I know how the space between the two is where most people get into trouble. She set the cup down. Hayes is working in that space. If we're going to push him back, we need to close it. We, Ethan said. She looked at him. You said partnership. I did. Then act like it, she said. Let me in. He looked at her for a long moment. This woman he'd known for 3 days, sitting at his father's table with his father's papers organized in neat piles with a logic he could follow immediately, who had not asked for anything except the truth and the right to stand beside him. All right, he said. Good, she said. And she picked up the pen. The morning passed in work, which suited them both. Ethan wrote the letter to Harrison Aldrich, while Clara cross-referenced the survey documents against Hayes's filings, noting the specific markers Hayes disputed and the dates on which he'd introduced each claim. She built a timeline on a clean sheet of paper, not because Ethan asked her to, but because it was the kind of thing that needed to exist, and she was the person in the room who could see that. At some point, Nora set lunch in front of them, and they ate without stopping what they were doing, which Nora accepted with the manner of a woman who had seen this kitchen used as an office many times and had made her peace with it. By early afternoon, they had a letter that laid out the full history of the dispute with a clarity that surprised even Ethan. "This is good," he said, reading it back. "It's clear," she corrected. "Lawyers don't need good, they need clear." He almost smiled. They were sealing the letter when the sound of hooves reached the house. Not the sound of one rider, several. Clara looked at Ethan. He was already on his feet. He got to the window before she did. His jaw tightened. "Hayes," he said, "and he brought men with him." "How many be?" "4." 4 men with Hayes was not a visit. Clara understood that immediately. 4 men was a statement. "What does he do this?" she said. "Rides in with a group." "First time," Ethan said. He said it evenly, but she heard the thing underneath it. "Don't go out angry," she said. He looked at her. "If you go out angry, he's already won something," she said. "Go out like he's an inconvenience, like you have better things to do with your afternoon." He looked at her for 1 second. Then he took his hat off the hook, settled it on his head, with the unhurried motion of a man who was entirely in control of his own time, and walked to the door. Clara followed him. He looked back at her. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," she said. "You said partnership." He held the door for her. They walked out together. Victor Hayes sat on his pale horse in the yard. His 4 men fanned out behind him in a loose arrangement that wasn't quite a line, but wasn't accidental either. He looked at Ethan coming out the front door and smiled. Then he looked at Clara, and something shifted in the smile recalculation, subtle and fast. "Callahan," he said. "Afternoon." "Hayes," Ethan said. He stopped at the edge of the porch. Clara stood beside him. "What do you need?" "I was hoping we could have a conversation," Hayes said, "about the eastern section." "We've had that conversation," Ethan said, "several times." "I'd like to have it again," Hayes said. His voice was still pleasant. He looked at Clara. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced." "No," she said. "We haven't." "Victor Hayes," he said. "I'm your neighbor to the east." "I know who you are," she said. He looked at her for a moment, with the particular attention of a man who was trying to figure out how much she knew. "And you are Clara Bennett," she said. "I'm helping Mr. Callahan with his estate management." The word estate landed in the yard between them like a stone dropped in still water. She used it deliberately. It reframed the conversation before it started. Not a lone rancher and his disputed fence line, but an estate with management. Hayes heard it. She saw him hear it. "Estate management," he repeated. "Yes," she said. "That's a new development," Hayes said. "Mr. Callahan and I have been reviewing his survey documentation," she said, "and the court filings from the last 2 years. We've been preparing a letter to Harrison Aldrich and Helena." The name Aldrich did something to Hayes's face. It was small, barely there, but Clara had been watching for it, and she caught it. Hayes knew the name, and the name meant something to him that he didn't want it to mean. "Aldrich," Hayes said. "He handled the Faraday dispute," she said. "You may be familiar with the outcome." A silence. It was a very specific kind of silence, the silence of a man recalibrating quickly. "I came to make a reasonable offer," Hayes said, and his voice had dropped half a register from where it started. "The land isn't for sale," Ethan said. "Everything has a price, Callahan." "Not this," Ethan said. He didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. "Not the land my father built and my grandfather worked before him. Not any section of it." He looked at Hayes evenly. "You've been told that before. I'm telling you again." Hayes looked at him, then at Clara, then back at Ethan. Something in his expression settled into a harder shape. "A man alone out here can run into all sorts of trouble," he said. His voice was still pleasant, but the pleasantness was a coat now, not a face. Land management legal expenses. Weather can be unpredictable. It can, Ethan agreed. But we're not alone out here. I'd encourage you to keep that in mind. Hayes looked at Clara one more time. This time the look was longer, and it wasn't entirely hostile. It was something else. She held it without looking away. He turned his horse. "Good afternoon, Miss Bennet," he said. "Mr. Hayes," she said. He rode out. His men followed. Clara watched them go until they were through the gate. Then she let herself breathe. Beside her, Ethan was still. "You named Aldrich," he said. "Yes. You knew it would land." "I hoped it would," she said. "I needed to see his face when I said it." And she looked at him. "He's afraid of Aldrich," she said. "Which means he's been watching what happened with the Faraday case very carefully. Which means the legal strategy he's been using against you has a weakness he already knows about." She paused. "And it means we might have more ground than we think." Ethan looked at her. The afternoon light was flat and bright over the yard, and he was looking at her in a way she hadn't seen from him before, not assessing, not grateful, not cautious. Something more complicated than any of those. "Who are you?" he said quietly. She looked at him. "I told you who I am," she said. "A seamstress with 40 cents and a canvas bag." He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "You're not." She turned and walked back into the house before he could say anything else. But she was aware for the rest of that afternoon that he was watching her the way a man watches something he's been looking for and didn't expect to actually find. That evening, Nora sat with them after supper. This was apparently a ritual, Nora with her knitting, Ethan with his ledger, the lamp burning between them. Clara sat across from Ethan with the survey papers and the timeline she'd drawn, but she set it aside after a while and just sat. "How long have you been here?" she asked Nora. 19 years, Nora said without looking up from her work. "I came when his mother was still alive. I stayed after." She glanced up. "You want to know if I'll tell you the truth about him?" "Yes," Clara said. Nora set her knitting down on her knee. "He is the most stubborn man in 3 territories," she said. "He will work himself to ruin before he asks for help. He has not had a conversation at that table." She pointed to the work table. "That wasn't about cattle prices or legal filings in 4 years. He doesn't know how to be in a room with another person without it being about the ranch." She looked at Clara. "He is also honest to a fault, fair to everyone who works here, and has never once asked a thing from anyone that he wasn't willing to give himself." She picked her knitting back up. "He needs someone who won't let him disappear into the work. Someone who'll say something when he's wrong." She glanced at Ethan, who was looking at his ledger with the expression of a man who very much wished he were somewhere else. "He doesn't like hearing this. I can tell," Clara said. "But it's the truth," Nora said. "And you asked." Clara looked at Ethan. He didn't look up from the ledger for a long moment. Then he closed it, set it aside, and looked at her. "She's not wrong," he said. "I know," Clara said. "About any of it." "I know," she said again. He looked at her across the table and the lamp, and the moment had a weight to it that she felt somewhere below her breastbone. "I'm going to give you something tonight," he said. He stood up and went to the shelf near the fireplace, not the books, the shelf below. He came back with a small locked box and a key on a cord. He set both on the table in front of her. "Everything in there, every document, every piece of correspondence, every record my father kept, and everything I've added since. I've never shown that box to anyone." He looked at her steadily. "If you're going to help me with this, you should have all of it." She looked at the box, then at him. "Why now?" she said. "Because you were right this morning," he said. "I've been doing this alone because it felt like my responsibility, but I've been making it harder than it had to be." He paused. "And because you walked out of that house this afternoon and stood beside me without being asked, and you said 2 sentences that turned Hayes around before he got started." His jaw worked for a moment. "Nobody's done that for me before, not once." The room was very quiet. Nora's needles had stopped. Clara reached out and picked up the key. "Tell me where to start," she said. He sat back down. He opened the box himself and lifted the first folder. "From the beginning," he said. And together under the lamp in the first real quiet that ranch house had held in years they began. They worked through the box until the lamp oil ran low. By the time Nora said goodnight and took herself off to bed, Clara had read every document in the locked box twice: the original land grant from 1849, the federal survey from 1871. Every letter Ethan's father had written to the Territorial Land Office, every response received, and every piece of correspondence that had come from Victor Hayes or his lawyer in Helena over the past 2 years. She organized them into a sequence that told a story, because that was what they were: a story written in ink and legal language about a patient man trying to take something that didn't belong to him. Ethan watched her work. He answered her questions when she had them, and when she didn't have questions, he was quiet, which she appreciated. At one point, she looked up and caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't entirely read, something between gratitude and something rawer than that. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Keep going." She kept going. When she finally set the last folder down, she sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Ethan waited. "There's something missing," she said. "What do you mean?" "Hayes started filing in 1882, she said. 11 years after your father commissioned the federal survey. That's not an oversight. He was waiting for something. Waiting for the right moment, or the right information." She looked at Ethan. "Did anything change in 1882 on this property or in the surrounding valley?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "My father got sick," he said. "The winter of 1881. He was sick for most of that year. Word got around." "Hayes heard that your father was ill," Clara said. "Yes. And started filing the month your father was diagnosed." Ethan stared at her. "I never put that together," he said. "Not like that. I knew the timing, but I never—" He stopped. "I was waiting for your father to be too weak to fight it," she said. "And when your father recovered enough to respond, Hayes pulled back, slowed the filings. Then your father died, and Hayes started again." The silence in the room went very heavy. "He's been doing this for 15 years, Clara said. "Waiting for weakness, pressing on it, pulling back when someone pushes. He's never had someone push back with the right tools." She looked at the papers. "That's what Aldrich does. That's why Hayes's face moved when I said the name." Ethan looked at the table. His hands were flat on the surface, and she could see the tension in his forearms. Not anger, but the kind of controlled feeling that lives right next to anger and takes more effort to manage. "He waited for my father to die," he said. "Yes," she said. She didn't soften it. He didn't need it softened. "And then he waited for me to be alone long enough to be worn down." "Yes," she said again. "I was quiet for a long time. Then he said, 'I should have gotten a lawyer 2 years ago.'" "You should have," she agreed. "But you're getting one now." She folded her hands on the table. "Send the letter to Aldrich first thing tomorrow. I'll add a postscript about the 1882 timing. He needs to know that pattern before he reads anything else." Ethan nodded. "And Ethan." She waited until he looked at her. "This isn't your fault. A man can only fight with what he knows. You didn't know what he was doing because he was careful not to let you see the full shape of it." She held his gaze. "You see it now." He looked at her across the table. This woman who had been on his property for less than 2 days and had just handed him a clearer picture of his own situation than he'd managed to build in 2 years alone. "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." She stood up and gathered the papers into their proper piles. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow's going to be a working day." She took the lamp to her room, and she lay in the dark, and she thought about the particular shape of a man who had been carrying something heavy for so long he'd stopped noticing the weight. She thought he needed someone to see it. Not to carry it for him. Just to see it with him. She understood that feeling better than she could say. The letter went out the next morning with the ranch hand, who made the weekly supply run to Red Hollow. Clara watched him ride out from the porch letter in the inside pocket of his vest and then turned back to the day. There was work to do. There was always work to do on a ranch. She was learning not the frantic, disorganized scramble of poverty, which she knew intimately, but the layered, relentless work of maintaining something large. Fences, water, animals, equipment, accounts. A working ranch in summer was a living thing that demanded constant attention, and she watched how Ethan managed it with the focused eye of someone trying to understand a new system. I was good at it. That was the honest truth. He knew every section of the property, every hand who worked it, every animal by sight. He moved through the ranch with the authority of someone who had grown up understanding that this land was a responsibility, not just a possession. She saw him that morning stop a young hand named Pete from making what would have been a costly mistake with the fencing on the north pasture, and do it in a way that didn't embarrass the boy. Just redirected him, showed him the right approach, moved on. An hour later, she saw him talking with the oldest hand on the property, a man called Silas, who had worked for his father, and the way he listened to Silas, not impatiently, not with the half-attention of someone waiting to speak, was the kind of listening that men twice his age didn't always manage. Nora caught her watching from the kitchen door. "You're studying him," Nora said. "Yes," Clara said without embarrassment. "And?" "He's exactly what he appears to be," Clara said. "That's still surprising to me." Nora made a sound that was half agreement, half something more complicated. "He had a rough time of it," she said. "After Sarah." Clara looked at her. "Who is Sarah?" Nora was quiet for a moment, the pause of a person deciding how much to say. "A woman," she said finally. 3 years before his father died. Ethan thought they'd be married. She thought so too for a while. She looked at her coffee cup. Then she found out the full extent of what this property was worth, and the conversation changed. She wanted the ranch, Clara said. She wanted what the ranch meant, Nora said. The money, the position. She started making plans for it out loud, things she'd change how she'd run it. And Ethan? Nora shook her head. He's smart about most things, but he was slow to see that one, because he loved her. Clara was quiet. When he finally understood what he was looking at, he ended it, Nora said, cleanly without a scene. But it changed him, made him careful, about who he let close. She looked at Clara directly. He hasn't let anyone close in 4 years, not once. Until 3 days ago, Clara said. Until 3 days ago, Nora agreed. So whatever you're deciding about him, decide, knowing that it cost him something to come find you. Clara looked out of the yard where Ethan was now talking with Silas. Both of them looking at something in the middle distance. Both of them with the relaxed posture of men who've had this same conversation in this same spot many times. I know, she said. I can see that. Good, Nora said, and she went back to the kitchen. It was Silas who brought the first piece of real trouble. He came to the house at noon, hat in hand, with the expression of a man delivering news he'd been turning over in his mind for a while. Ethan was at the work table with Clara going through the water rights documentation she'd suggested they review when Silas knocked at the open door. Sorry to interrupt, he said, but you need to hear this. Ethan looked up. Come in. Silas came in and stood near the table. He looked at Clara for just a moment, a quick assessing look, then back at Ethan. Riley came back from town this morning, he said. He heard something at the feed store. What did he hear? Ethan said. Hayes has been talking to the Territorial Land Commissioner, Silas said. Not Greer Hayes himself. Rode to Helena last week while you were gone. He paused. Word is, he filed a supplementary claim. Something about a second survey done in 1879 that contradicts the 1871 markers. Ethan went very still. There was no survey in 1879. No, Silas said. There wasn't. Not one your father commissioned. The implication landed in the room like a stone. Clara looked at Ethan. His jaw had tightened. He manufactured a survey, she said. Silas looked at her. He hadn't heard her speak before, and she could see him calibrating. That's one interpretation, he said carefully. Is there another? She said. He thought about it. No, he said. Not one that makes sense. A forged survey document filed with the Territorial Land Commissioner, Clara said. She was already moving, pulling the original 1871 survey toward her. If that document exists and gets accepted before we can challenge it, It poisons everything, Ethan said. Every subsequent filing, even the water rights. Yes, she said. She looked at him. How fast can you get to Helena? 2 days hard riding, he said. Can you leave today? He looked at Silas. Silas nodded once. Yes, Ethan said. Then go, she said. You need to get to Aldrich before that supplementary claim gets entered into the court record. Once it's in challenging, it becomes twice as complicated and twice as expensive. She stood. Take the original 1871 survey. Take your father's correspondence with the Federal Land Office from that period. Don't take anything else, just the documents that prove the 1879 survey couldn't exist. Ethan was already standing. He looked at her. And you? I'll be here, she said. I'll go through the rest of the box. If there's anything in there that references 1879, any letter, any record, anything, I'll find it. He looked at her for a moment that lasted slightly longer than necessary. You're sure? She looked back at him. I'm sure, she said. Go. He went. He had the specific quality of a man who knows how to move fast when it matters, and within 20 minutes he was on his horse and out the gate with the documents in a leather satchel, Silas riding with him to the edge of the property. Clara stood in the doorway and watched them go. Then she went back to the box. She found it 4 hours later. She almost missed it. It was at the bottom of the box beneath a stack of older cattle sale receipts from the early 1870s, folded into a plain envelope without a date on the outside. She opened it expecting another record of sale, and found instead a letter in a handwriting she didn't recognize. She read it twice. Then she sat very still. The letter was dated September 1879. It was addressed to Ethan's father, Robert Callahan. It was from a man named Thomas Voss, a name Clara didn't know, and it described in careful and specific language a meeting that had taken place between Voss Victor Hayes and a territorial surveyor named Lyle Crane. The meeting had taken place at Hayes's property. The purpose, as Voss described it, had been to discuss the possibility of a resurvey of the valley's eastern boundary. Voss had refused to participate. He had written the letter to Robert Callahan to warn him that Hayes was planning to commission a private survey using a surveyor who, as Voss put it, has made it known that his findings are adjustable for the right consideration. In other words, Hayes had tried to forge a survey in 1879. Robert Callahan had known about it, and he had kept this letter at the bottom of a locked box and never used it. Clara read the letter a third time very slowly. She thought he knew. He knew Hayes was trying to manufacture evidence, and he kept this letter, and he never told anyone, and he never used it. She thought, why? And then reading the letter a fourth time, she found the sentence she'd passed over twice without registering its full weight. I am telling you this because you deserve to know, and because I believe you are a man of principle. I am not prepared to testify publicly to what I witnessed, as Hayes still holds the note on my property, and I cannot afford the consequence. But I wanted you to know what he is. Thomas Voss had known. He had written the warning. But he had been in debt to Hayes, and his debt had bought his silence. And Robert Callahan had kept the letter, had held on to it for 13 years, because it was proof of Hayes's intent, even if Voss couldn't testify to it. He'd been waiting for Voss to become free of the debt, or for Hayes to overplay his hand, or for some other piece of evidence to emerge that would make this letter useful rather than isolated. He'd died before any of those things happened, and Ethan had put the box on a shelf and locked it, and spent 2 years fighting a paper war and never known what was sitting at the bottom. Nora appeared in the doorway with coffee. She looked at Clara's face and set the coffee down immediately. What is it? Clara held up the letter. Do you know a man named Thomas Voss? She said. Nora went absolutely still. I knew of him, she said slowly. He had a small property in the next valley. He left, 8-9 years ago. Said he was going to Oregon. Did he leave, or was he pushed? Clara said. Nora sat down. I don't know for certain, she said, but there were stories that he'd had a falling out with Hayes, that Hayes called in a debt suddenly, and Voss had to sell everything to cover it. She looked at the letter. What does it say? Clara told her. Nora was quiet for a long time. So Hayes has been doing this for 30 years, she said finally. Not 15, 30. At least, Clara said. And Robert Callahan knew. He kept the evidence, but he couldn't use it alone. And Ethan never knew any of it, Nora said. No, Clara said. He knew Hayes was a problem. He didn't know the shape of it. She looked at the letter. This changes what we send to Aldrich. Ethan's already on his way, Nora said. I know. Clara looked at the window, calculating. Ethan had 2 days of riding ahead of him. She had no way to reach him before he got to Helena. It means when Aldrich reads the original letter, it's going to raise questions that Ethan won't be able to answer. And when Ethan comes back, he's going to have to hear this from me. He won't like it, Nora said, not knowing his father kept a secret this large. No, Clara agreed. He won't. She folded the letter and set it carefully inside the leather folder with the other documents. But he needs to know, all of it. Nora looked at her. You're not going to soften it for him, are you? No, Clara said. He's a grown man. He can handle the truth. What he can't afford right now is a filtered version of it. Nora looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a woman who had been right about something she'd hoped to be right about. Good, she said quietly. Ethan came back on the 3rd day. Clara heard his horse in the yard before she heard the door, and she was already at the work table with the Voss letter and the folder of documents by the time he came through. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had ridden hard and slept little and worked through most of the hours in between. But he came through the door straight, and he looked at her first before the table, before the papers, and whatever he saw in her face made him set his hat down carefully. What did you find? He said. Sit down, she said. He sat. She handed him the letter. She watched him read it. She watched his face move through the stages. First confusion, then understanding, then something she couldn't name, precisely. Something that lived between grief and anger and a kind of exhausted recognition. He read it to the end. He set it down. He looked at the table. He knew, Ethan said. Yes, she said. 13 years ago. Yes. He was quiet. She let him be quiet. This wasn't the kind of thing that needed filling up with words. After a long while, he said, He didn't tell me. No, she said. But he kept it. He kept it because he knew it had value. He just couldn't use it alone. He was waiting for the right moment. And he ran out of time, Ethan said. Yes. He looked at the letter again. He picked it up, read the middle section once more, the part about Thomas Voss and the debt, and Hayes holding the note on Voss's property. Hayes took his land, Ethan said. To keep him quiet, Clara said. Yes, that's what I believe. Where is Voss now? Nora says Oregon, Clara said. 8 or 9 years ago. Ethan set the letter down again. He looked at her. Can we find him? Clara felt something straighten in her chest. Because that was exactly the right question. Not how could my father not? Why didn't I know? But can we find him? Forward. Practical. What does this change, and what do we do with it? I think so, she said. If he's in Oregon and he's alive, Aldrich will know how to reach him. A deposition from Voss, even a written statement, would turn this entire case. It's not just about the forged 1879 survey. It's about a pattern of conduct going back 30 years. Did you reach Aldrich? He asked. I sent a second letter with Riley, she said. The day after you left. I included the information about the 1879 survey attempt, everything in the Voss letter, and asked him to delay his initial response until he'd read it. Ethan looked at her. You managed this while I was gone. Yes, she said. I hope that was all right. He shook his head slowly. It wasn't all right, he said. It was exactly right. He paused. You didn't have to do that. You're not obligated to any of this. I know, she said. I did it because it needed doing, and I was the person here to do it. He looked at her across the table, and the afternoon light was coming through the window behind her, and he looked like a man who was running out of reasons to hold himself at a distance. Clara, he said, It was the first time he'd used her given name without adding Miss. She noticed, and she let herself notice. Yes, she said. He seemed to search for the right words, and for a man who didn't have many to spare, the search took longer than usual. I owe you an accounting, he said finally, of the things I didn't tell you, before Red Hollow and after. You've been honest since the first morning, she said. Not fully, he said. I told you about Hayes. I told you about Sarah. He stopped. I didn't tell you that I went to Red Hollow in February and couldn't go through with it. I rode back. I told myself I wasn't ready. He paused. I went back in July because Hayes filed something new, and I realized that waiting for a perfect moment was going to cost me everything. She looked at him. February, she said. Yes. What changed? Nothing changed, he said. I just stopped being willing to let the fear run things. He looked at her steadily. I was afraid. Of picking wrong again. Of letting someone into this. He gestured at the room, the house, the whole weight of the valley, and having them take it apart with me standing there watching. He paused. I was afraid of that happening again. But you went anyway, she said. Yes. And you picked me, she said. Yes. She looked at him for a moment. That took something, she said. It was what Nora had said to her, and it was true, and he needed to know she understood it was true. He looked down at the table. It did, he said. And you? He stopped. And I what? She said. You've been in this house for 4 days, he said. And I trust you more than I've trusted anyone in 4 years. And I don't know what to do with that exactly, but I wanted you to know it. Clara was very still. She understood the weight of that. She understood it the way a person does when they've been careful for a long time themselves. The specific gravity of choosing to say something true and important, even when it costs you something to say it. I know, she said quietly. I can tell. Is that? He stopped, looked at her. Is that all right with you? She thought about a narrow room in Red Hollow, and 40 cents and 11 days, until the rent was due. She thought about sitting on a porch with a stranger, and laying out conditions, like a woman with everything to lose, because she was exactly that kind of woman. She thought about riding north into mountain country on a borrowed horse, because her mother had said the difference between pride and discernment was knowing when to move. Yes, she said. It's all right with me. He exhaled slowly. It was so controlled that most people wouldn't have caught it. She caught it. And then the moment, which had been quietly enormous, was interrupted by Nora coming through from the kitchen with the blunt announcement that supper was on the table, and both of them looked like they needed to eat before they said another word. They both moved toward the kitchen, and Clara was almost through the door when she realized Ethan was no longer walking behind her. She turned. Howe was standing by the work table. He had his father's letter in his hand, the Voss letter, and he was looking at it with the expression of a man saying goodbye to something. My father kept this for 13 years, he said more to himself than to her. He was waiting for the right person to help him use it. He looked at her. I think, he said slowly, he would have liked you. Clara felt something move through her chest that she had no immediate name for. I think, she said carefully, I would have liked him too. She turned and walked into the kitchen, and after a moment, she heard his footsteps follow. Aldrich's reply came 6 days later. Riley brought it from town folded inside an outer envelope with the lawyer's seal pressed into the wax. Ethan set it on the table between them and looked at Clara. You open it, he said. It's addressed to you, she said. You've been managing this more than I have, he said. Open it. She picked it up and broke the seal. The letter was 4 pages written in the dense, precise hand of a man who billed by the hour and was worth every cent. Aldrich had done his homework before responding. That was immediately clear. He referenced the original 1871 survey with specific marker coordinates, cited the relevant territorial statutes, and then on page 3 addressed the Voss letter with a seriousness that made Clara's hands steady on the paper. She read the critical passage out loud. The letter from Thomas Voss, taken in conjunction with Hayes's recent supplementary claim, establishes a pattern of attempted fraud that predates the current dispute by 13 years. I am prepared to argue that the 1879 survey, if it exists as filed, is a fabrication, and that its submission constitutes criminal fraud against the Territorial Land Court. I have located a Thomas Voss currently residing in Portland, Oregon. He is alive. He is no longer indebted to any entity connected to Victor Hayes. And when I described the nature of the situation to his son, who spoke with me on his behalf, the response was, and I quote, "My father has been waiting for someone to ask him that question for 30 years." Clara stopped reading. The room was very quiet. Ethan looked at the table. His jaw worked once. He pressed his hands flat on the surface. "He's been waiting," Ethan said. 30 years, Clara said. Carrying that. Knowing what Hayes did and not being able to say it because of the debt. She set the letter down. "It's done now. Aldrich will depose him. The forged survey falls, and with it every claim Hayes has built on top of it." Ethan looked at her. His eyes were bright in a way she hadn't seen before. Not grief this time, not the controlled weight of a man holding too much. Something else. Something that looked for the first time since Red Hollow, like the specific face of a man who can see the end of a very long road. "It's not over," he said. "No," she said. "But the ground just shifted under Hayes, and he's going to know it before the week is out." Ethan was quiet for the long moment. Then he said, "You found that letter, Clara." "It was in the box," she said. "I've looked in that box 100 times," he said. "I've had it for 6 years. I never read everything in it." He looked at her. "You found it in 4 hours." "I read everything," she said simply. "That's all." He shook his head. He looked at her with an expression that she had stopped trying to categorize and had started simply allowing to be what it was. "No," he said. "That's not all. Not by a long distance." Clara looked down at the letter. She smoothed the page with one hand, an ordinary small gesture, and said nothing because some things didn't need answering. But she felt it. The particular warmth of being seen clearly by someone who wasn't looking for anything from you except the truth. It was, she realized, the most valuable thing anyone had offered her in a very long time, and she was not going to let it go. Hayes found out about Aldrich on a Tuesday. Clara knew this because by Wednesday morning, Victor Hayes had ridden to 3 separate properties in the valley: the Mercer homestead, the Dolan family, and old Silas's cousin, who ran a small operation near the creek, and told each of them in different words, but with the same essential message, that Ethan Callahan was about to lose his land dispute, and that anyone who had agreements with the Callahan ranch ought to start thinking about their options. Pete brought the news in from the Mercer place before breakfast. He stood in the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hands and the expression of a young man delivering something he'd rather not deliver, and he told Ethan what Tom Mercer had told him, word for word. Ethan listened without moving. When Pete finished, Ethan thanked him and told him to go get breakfast. Pete left. Nora poured coffee. Clara set down the document she'd been reading and looked at Ethan. "He's trying to isolate you," she said. "Yes," Ethan said. "Before the court date, he wants the Valley families nervous so that when this goes to hearing, nobody stands with you." "That's Hayes," Ethan said. "He doesn't just fight the man, he fights the ground the man stands on." Clara looked at the papers in front of her. Aldrich's letter, the Voss correspondence, the timeline she'd built over the past week and a half. She'd been adding to it every day, filling in gaps, connecting lines between events that Ethan had never thought to connect, because he'd been too close to each one individually to see the shape of them together. "Then we do the same thing in reverse," she said. He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "He's going to those families to create doubt," she said. "We go to those families to give them facts." She looked at him steadily. "Do you trust the Mercers?" "Tom Mercer worked this valley for 20 years before he got his own land," Ethan said. "His father worked for mine." "And the Dolans?" "Same history," he said. "Bridget Dolan's husband helped my father run cattle through the Canyon Pass every summer for a decade." "Then they deserve to know what Hayes has actually been doing," Clara said. "Not the version he's selling them, the real version." She stood. "Take me to the Mercer place today." He looked at her for a moment. "You want to talk to them?" "Yes," she said. Because right now all they know is that Hayes came to their door and said your legal position is weak. They don't know about the forged survey. They don't know about Voss. They don't know that Aldrich has already located a witness who can testify to 30 years of fraud. And if they know all of that, Ethan said, then Hayes comes to their door and they have a different conversation with him, she said. Ethan looked at her across the table. Nora was pointedly not looking at either of them, occupying herself with something at the stove. All right, he said. We leave in an hour. The Mercer place was a 40-minute ride north along the Creek Road. Tom Mercer was a broad-shouldered man of 50, with a handshake like a gate closing, and eyes that had spent 30 years reading weather, and wasn't fooled by much. His wife Ruth brought coffee without being asked, and sat at the table with her husband, in the way of a woman who expected to be part of whatever conversation was happening. Clara liked her immediately. Tom Mercer looked at Ethan with the particular expression of a man who was sorry about something. I want you to know I didn't take what Hayes said as gospel, he said. I've known you since you were 12 years old. I know that, Tom, Ethan said. I'm not here to argue the friendship. I'm here to tell you what's actually happening, so you have the full picture. Tom looked at Clara. This is Clara Bennett, Ethan said. She's been managing the estate documentation. She knows this situation better than anyone. Tom extended his hand across the table. Ma'am. Mr. Mercer, Clara said. She shook it. I want to tell you about a letter we found, and about a man named Thomas Voss. She told them everything, clearly in order without dramatizing it. The 1879 survey attempt. Voss's letter to Robert Callahan. The debt Hayes had used to buy Voss's silence and eventually take his property. The forged supplementary survey filed with the Territorial Commissioner. Harrison Aldrich in Helena. Voss in Portland alive and prepared to testify. She laid it out, the way she'd laid out the documents on the work table, in a sequence that told the story so plainly that the story told itself. When she finished, Tom Mercer was very quiet. Ruth had her hands folded on the table and was looking at them with an expression that had moved past surprise into something older and heavier. 30 years, Tom said. At least, Clara said. He took Voss's land, Tom said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Clara said. Tom looked at Ethan. Your father knew. He knew Hayes had tried to manufacture a survey, Ethan said. He kept the evidence. He was waiting for an opportunity to use it. He didn't tell you. No. Ethan's voice was even. He didn't get the chance. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Ruth looked at her husband with a very specific expression. The expression of a wife who already knows what her husband is going to decide and is waiting for him to say it out loud. What do you need from us? Tom said. Nothing right now, Ethan said. Just the truth, so you can tell Hayes the right thing when he comes back. Tom Mercer's jaw set. If Hayes comes back to my door, he said, what I'm going to tell him isn't fit for mixed company. He looked at his wife. Pardon, Ruth. I've heard worse, Ruth said mildly. They rode to the Dolan place after that and had the same conversation with Bridget Dolan, who was a widow of 63, with strong opinions and a memory like a steel trap. She had known about Voss, she remembered when he left, remembered the talk about the debt, and said in a voice like flint on flint that she'd always suspected Hayes's hand in it, but had never been able to prove it. I can't prove it either, Clara said. Not that part. But Aldrich doesn't need us to prove the old injury. He just needs Voss's testimony about the 1879 survey attempt. The forged 1879 document does the rest. Bridget Dolan looked at her. You're not from this valley, she said. No, Clara said. I'm from Red Hollow. How long have you been here? 11 days, Clara said. Bridget looked at Ethan. She had the face of a woman who had raised 6 children and was not easily surprised. You found a good one, she said. Ethan looked at Clara. Yes, he said. I did. Clara looked at the table. They rode home in the early evening, and neither of them said much, but the silence between them had changed character since Red Hollow. It had become the silence of people who were comfortable with each other, which was a different and more significant thing.
Joel.
The second twist came from a direction Clara hadn't anticipated, and it came fast. 2 days after the Mercer visit, Riley came back from town, not with mail, but with a man, a stranger in a good coat, traveling alone, who had asked at the feed store for directions to the Callahan property and been told to wait for the supply run. He introduced himself as James Aldrich, not Harrison. James. Harrison Aldrich's son, who worked in his father's practice and had ridden from Helena personally, because as he said with the careful phrasing of a young lawyer, the situation had developed in a way that warranted a direct conversation. Ethan looked at the man on the porch. "Developed how?" "May I come in?" James Aldrich said. They sat at the work table, all three of them, and James Aldrich opened his case and produced a document that he set in the center of the table. "Victor Hayes filed a second supplementary claim 4 days ago," he said. "This one doesn't reference the 1879 survey." Clara looked at the document. "What does it reference?" "A debt," Aldrich said. "He claims Robert Callahan borrowed money from him in 1878, a significant sum, and that the loan was secured against the eastern lower pasture. He's filed a lien." The room went very still. Ethan said, "That's not true." "I know that," Aldrich said. "Or rather, my father believes that. But Hayes has produced a document, a promissory note with your father's signature on it." "My father never borrowed money from Hayes," Ethan said. His voice had dropped to something flat and controlled that was more alarming than anger would have been. "Not once, not ever. My father wouldn't have taken water from that man if he was dying of thirst." "I understand," Aldrich said. "But the note exists, and it's been filed." Clara picked up the copy Aldrich had brought. She read it. She read it again. She looked at the signature line. "Do you have anything with your father's actual signature?" she asked Ethan. "Letters, the survey correspondence, anything from that period 1875 to 1880. Ethan stood immediately and went to the shelf. He pulled down the second box, the one she hadn't fully worked through the older records. He brought it to the table and opened it. The survey correspondence from 1871 was there 3 letters between Robert Callahan and the Federal Land Office, signed and dated. Clara set them beside the promissory note. She looked at the signatures. She looked at them for a long time. "Mr. Aldrich," she said, "do you see the capital R?" James Aldrich leaned in. "Yes." "In your father's correspondence with Robert Callahan," she said, "did he note anything about the handwriting?" Aldrich reached into his case and produced a folder. "Actually," he said slowly, "my father did note something. He said the signature on the promissory note looked, and I'm quoting his letter to me, effortful in the way of a signature that has been practiced rather than lived." "Yes," Clara said. She pointed to the R in Robert on the survey letter, then to the R on the promissory note. The survey letter was written by a man who signed his name 10,000 times. The note was signed by someone who had studied that signature and reproduced it. The R has the right shape, but the wrong motion. You can see it in the pressure the survey letter's R releases at the top. The note's R completes itself. A man doesn't complete his own initial. He releases it. Aldrich stared at the 2 documents. "You can see that," he said. "My mother was a seamstress," Clara said. "I grew up looking at the difference between a seam that's been sewn and a seam that's been constructed to look sewn. The principle is the same." Ethan was looking at her. He hadn't sat back down. "It's forged," he said. "Yes," she said. "And we can prove it with a document examiner. Aldrich needs to request one through the territorial court before Hayes can get the note entered into the main record." James Aldrich was already writing. "My father will file that request today if I wire him this afternoon." "Then go," Clara said. "What time does the telegraph office in Red Hollow close?" 5 o'clock, Riley offered from the doorway where he had apparently been standing long enough to hear most of this. Clara looked at the clock on the shelf. It was 2:30. "You can make it if you leave now," she said to Aldrich. He closed his case and stood. He looked at Clara with the expression of a young professional reassessing something. "Miss Bennett," he said, "are you a lawyer?" "No," she said. "You should be," he said. She looked at the documents on the table. "Go send your wire, Mr. Aldrich." He went. The quiet after the door closed was enormous. Ethan stood on one side of the table. Clara stood on the other. Between them were the two boxes, the documents, the forged note, the survey letters, and the accumulated weight of everything that had happened in the 13 days since she'd arrived at the Callahan Ranch with a canvas bag and 40 cents and a set of conditions. "Two forged documents," Ethan said. "That we know of," Clara said. "He's desperate," Ethan said. "He's losing," she said. "Desperate men who are losing make mistakes. The promissory note is a mistake. It's too large a claim filed too fast with a forgery that doesn't hold up to 10 minutes of scrutiny." She looked at him. He filed it because Aldrich's involvement scared him and fear made him overreach. Ethan looked at the note. "My father's name," he said. "I know," she said. "I know." He looked up at her. His jaw was tight and his eyes were very dark, and she understood that what he was carrying at this particular moment wasn't just about the land or the legal case. It was about his father's name on a fraudulent document. It was about a man who had been dead for 6 years being made to lie. "Ethan," she said. He looked at her. "We're going to fix this," she said. "Not just the land, his name, all of it. When Aldrich is done, there won't be a court in Montana Territory that doesn't know what Victor Hayes did, and there won't be any question about who Robert Callahan was." He was very still. "You understand me," she said. "Yes," he said quietly. "Good," she said. "Then let's get back to work." He pulled out his chair. She pulled out hers. And they sat back down at the table and kept going. That night, Nora went to bed early and left them at the table with the lamp and the papers and the particular intimacy that develops between people who have been working hard toward the same thing. Clara was reviewing Aldrich's original letter when Ethan set down his pen and said without preamble, "I want to ask you something." She looked up. "All right. When this is over," he said. "When the hearing is done and Hayes is finished and Aldrich has settled the legal question, what do you want to do?" She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean..." He stopped. Started again. "I brought you here under specific circumstances. There was a reason I needed someone, and that reason involved Hayes and the property and the legal situation, and you've..." He paused. "You've done more than I had any right to expect, more than I could have imagined. You asked for a partner," she said. "I know what I asked for," he said. "I'm asking what you want. When the circumstances that brought you here are resolved, what do you want for yourself? What do you want your life to look like?" Clara set her pen down. She thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I want to be useful," she said. "Not in the way of someone who has no other option. In the way of someone who has chosen to apply themselves to something that matters." She looked at the papers. "This matters. These people." She gestured toward the Mercer and Dolan places somewhere beyond the walls. "This valley, this property. What your father built and what you've kept. It matters. And I'm good at what I've been doing here." She looked at him directly. "I don't want to go back to mending dresses for Owen Harding." He held her gaze. "Then don't," he said. "It's not that simple," she said. "I came here on a trial. You asked me to see the ranch and make a decision. I haven't made a formal decision about anything." "No," he said. "You haven't." "And you haven't asked me to," she said. "I'm asking now," he said. She was very still. "That's a different question than the one you asked in Red Hollow," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." "In Red Hollow you needed a partner for the ranch," she said. "That's still true," he said. "But it's not the only thing that's true anymore." She looked at him across the lamp. The light between them was warm and close, and the house was quiet, and outside the mountains held the valley in the particular summer dark of high country. And she thought about how long it had been since she'd had a home. Not a rented room, not a borrowed space, but a place where her presence was wanted and her work had meaning, and someone looked at her the way Ethan Callahan was looking at her right now. "What else is true?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "I don't want you to leave," he said. "Not when this is over. Not for any reason I can think of." He paused. That's not a practical statement about estate management. That's me telling you something that's got nothing to do with the land." Clara let the words settle. She let herself feel the full weight of them without managing them, or organizing them, or putting them somewhere useful. "I know," she said. "Is that—" "Yes," she said, before he could finish the question. "Yes, it is." He exhaled slowly. She heard it. She let herself hear it. "All right," he said. He picked up his pen. "Then we finish this first." "We finish this first," she agreed. She picked up her own pen, and they worked until the lamp oil ran low, and neither of them mentioned what had just happened, and both of them knew exactly what had happened, and that was enough. The letter from Harrison Aldrich came 8 days later, and it carried news that changed the shape of everything. Voss had agreed to travel from Portland to Helena for the deposition. He was 71 years old and had not been well, but his son had written to Aldrich that when his father heard the full account of what Hayes had done, the forged survey, the promissory note, the 30 years of quiet fraud, Thomas Voss had stood up from his chair and said he'd ride to Montana on horseback if that was what it took. He was coming by rail. He would be in Helena within the month. Aldrich had also filed the request for a document examiner with the territorial court, and the court had assigned a man from the Federal Land Office in Washington, who specialized in authentication of land documents, and had, according to Aldrich, testified in 11 cases and been wrong exactly 0 times. The hearing was scheduled for the 2nd week of September. Clara read the letter aloud at the breakfast table. When she finished, nobody said anything for a moment. Then Pete, who was eating at the far end of the table, because the kitchen had gotten crowded with hands coming in for the morning meal, said quietly, "That's it then." "That's the beginning of it," Clara said. "The hearing still has to happen." "But we've got him," Pete said. "We've got the evidence to expose him," she said. "That's not quite the same thing. Hayes will fight until the court stops him." "Let him fight," said Silas from the doorway. He had the manner of a man who had been patient a very long time and had just seen the end of the patience come into view. "He's been fighting with shadows for 30 years. Let him try it when somebody's got a light." Ethan looked at Clara across the table. He didn't say anything, but she saw it, the particular look of a man who had spent years holding something by himself and could finally feel the weight of other hands beside his. She looked back at him. She held his gaze for exactly the right amount of time. Then she looked at the letter and said, "We have 6 weeks until the hearing. Let's not waste a single day of them." Nobody argued. The 6 weeks before the hearing did not pass quietly. Hayes knew what was coming. Clara could tell by the way the pressure shifted, not louder, but more precise, like a man who had been throwing his weight broadly and had suddenly decided to aim. The feed store in Red Hollow stopped extending credit to 2 of the Valley families who had agreements with the Callahan Ranch. A fence line on the Dolan property was cut 3 nights in a row, clean cuts with no tracks leading anywhere useful. A rumor started moving through Red Hollow that Ethan Callahan's legal situation was more complicated than it appeared, that there were debts involved, that the property might be encumbered in ways that would make any business arrangement risky. Clara tracked all of it. She kept a separate page in the ledger, not the estate ledger, a new one she'd bought from Owen Harding on a supply trip to town, which had given her a particular satisfaction, and she wrote down every incident, every rumor, every fence cut and credit refusal, with dates and names and the names of whoever had been nearby when it happened. Ethan watched her do this and said, "You're building a record." "Harassment and intimidation during active legal proceedings," she said without looking up. "Aldrich needs to know about every single instance. It goes to Hayes's conduct, which goes to the court's assessment of his credibility." "You think the judge will care about a few fence cuts?" She looked up. "I think that when Aldrich puts the full 30 years in front of a territorial judge, the 1879 survey attempt, the Voss debt, the forged promissory note, and 6 weeks of documented intimidation of neighboring properties, the judge is going to see a very clear picture of who Victor Hayes is." She paused. "And I think Hayes knows that, which is why he's getting more aggressive. He's scared." "Scared men are dangerous," Ethan said. "Yes," she said, "they are, which is why we don't give him anything to use." She sent the intimidation record to Aldrich in 3 separate letters over those 6 weeks, each one adding new entries. Aldrich wrote back after the second letter and said with the dry precision of a man who had been practicing law for 40 years that the record Clara had compiled was one of the most useful documents he had received in a case of this nature, and that he intended to introduce it in full. She didn't tell Ethan that. She didn't need to. She just kept writing in the ledger and let the work speak for itself. Tom Voss arrived in Helena the first week of September. Aldrich wrote to tell them, and Ethan read the letter at the breakfast table and looked like a man who had just felt the ground become solid under his feet after a long time on uncertain footing. He made the trip, he said. His son came with him, Clara said. She'd already read ahead. Aldrich says he's thin and the journey tired him, but his mind is clear and his memory is exact. She set the letter down. 30 years. He's been carrying this for 30 years, and he's come all the way from Portland to say it out loud. Ethan looked at the letter. He lost everything because of Hayes, he said. His property, his standing in the valley. He left and never came back. And now he's coming back, Clara said, in the way that matters. Ethan folded the letter. He held it for a moment, then set it on the table with a care that went beyond the handling of paper. My father would have wanted to thank him, he said. Then you thank him, Clara said, when this is done. He looked at her. Come to Helena with me, he said, for the hearing. She'd been expecting this, and she'd been thinking about her answer for 2 days. It's your hearing, she said. It started as my hearing, he said. It stopped being only mine somewhere around the time you found the Voss letter at the bottom of that box. He looked at her steadily. I want you there. She held his gaze. All right, she said. I'll come. Nora from the stove said nothing, but Clara heard the sound of a spoon being set down very carefully, as if the person holding it wanted to make no noise at all, so as not to disturb what was happening across the room. They rode to Helena 4 days before the hearing. Silas stayed behind to run the ranch with Pete and the other hands, and Nora packed them enough food for a week and pressed Clara's hand at the door with the grip of a woman who had something to say and was deciding not to say all of it. Come back in one piece, Nora said. We intend to, Clara said. Both of you, Nora said, looking at Ethan. Both of us, Ethan confirmed. They took the main road south and then east, and they made good time because the weather held dry and clear, the particular blue of a Montana September sky that looked like it had been put there by someone who understood scale. Clara rode the same bay mare she'd ridden from Red Hollow, who was becoming familiar enough that the animal moved with her without being managed. They talked more on that road than they had on any of the roads before it, partly because the urgency of preparation had lifted somewhat. Aldrich had everything he needed. The documents were filed. Voss was in Helena, and partly because something had shifted between them in the weeks since the conversation by the lamp, and the shift had made room for the kind of talk that isn't about tasks. Ethan asked about her parents. She told him about her father's store, about the particular smell of a dry goods shop in summer, about the way her mother had kept the accounts in a book with a green cover and had taught Clara the columns when she was 10. She told him about her father's death, which had come fast and without warning, and about the slower erosion of everything. After the store sold, the house sold the careful descent from security to bare sufficiency that her mother had managed with a dignity Clara still thought about. She never complained, Clara said. Not once. She'd lost everything, and she never once made me feel like it was a weight. She sounds like someone worth knowing, Ethan said. She was worth knowing, Clara said. He was quiet for a moment. You carry that, he said. The way she handled things. I can see it in how you work. She looked at the road ahead. Is that a compliment? It's an observation, he said. But yes, it is. She didn't answer, but she let herself feel it. After a while, she asked him about his father, not the practical things she already knew from the documents, but the person. He talked slowly at first the way men do about things they don't usually put into words, and then more freely. Robert Callahan had been a hard man in some ways, certain about what he believed, not easy to argue with, slow to praise. But he had also been, Ethan said, the most consistently fair person he had ever known. He had a rule, Ethan said. He said it every time one of the hands had a grievance or when there was a dispute about something on the property. He said, listen to the whole of it before you open your mouth. You can't see the shape of a thing until you've heard all of it. Clara turned that over. Good rule, she said. The best rule, he said. I've broken it more times than I'd like to admit, usually when I'm tired or when something hits me sideways. He paused. You do it naturally. You listen to the whole of everything before you say a word. My mother taught me, she said. She said a woman who listens carefully is worth twice a woman who talks quickly. Ethan looked at her. Smart woman. The smartest I ever knew, Clara said. Until... She stopped. He waited. Until Nora, she said finally. He smiled. It was a real smile, unhurried, without qualification, and it did something to his face that she hadn't seen before, made him look younger and more open, and like the man he might have been before 4 years of solitude and legal warfare had put their marks on him. She looked at the road ahead and kept riding. Helena was a different world from the valley. It was louder, fuller, pressed together in the way of a territorial capital that had grown faster than its infrastructure could manage. The streets were busy, and the buildings were tall, and there were more people in one block than lived in Red Hollow entire. Clara had been to Helena once years ago with her father. She remembered it as overwhelming. Now she found it merely busy, and she navigated it with the same focused attention she brought to everything. Aldrich's office was on the second floor of a stone building near the territorial courthouse. Harrison Aldrich himself was a man of 60, with a white beard, a sharp eye, and the manner of someone who had been underestimated many times and had found it consistently useful. He looked at Clara when Ethan introduced her and said, Miss Bennett, I've been reading your letters for 6 weeks. I feel I know you considerably. Your son was kind enough to visit us, she said. He's a good lawyer. He'll be better than me in another 10 years, Aldrich said without false modesty. Sit down. We have a great deal to go over before Thursday. They spent 2 full days in Aldrich's office. He walked them through the case structure, the sequence of arguments, the evidence as it would be presented. He was thorough and precise, and occasionally sharp, in a way that made Clara understand why Hayes had reacted visibly to his name. On the second day, he arranged for them to meet Thomas Voss. Voss was in a boarding house 2 blocks from Aldrich's office. His son, a man of about 40 named David, answered the door and led them to a sitting room where an old man waited in a chair by the window. I was thin. Aldrich had said that, and it was true. He had the particular thinness of someone who had been ill and was managing the aftermath. But his eyes were clear, and when Ethan walked into the room, something in Thomas Voss's face shifted in a way that Clara recognized as the look of a man who has waited a very long time for something and has finally stopped waiting. He looked at Ethan for a long moment. You look like your father, he said. His voice was quiet and deliberate. Around the eyes. Ethan crossed the room and shook the man's hand with both of his own. Mr. Voss, he said, I know what it took to come here. No, Voss said. You don't. But I'll tell you. He looked down at their hands. I wrote that letter to your father in 1879 because I was a coward who wasn't quite cowardly enough. I told him what Hayes was doing, but I wouldn't stand up and say it in front of anyone else because Hayes owned my debt. He looked up. I've lived with that for 30 years. I watched Hayes take property in that valley and ruin people and operate like a man who was untouchable. And every day of it, I knew that if I'd been willing to face him down in 1879, none of it would have happened. Ethan said nothing. Clara said nothing. I sold my land, Voss said. I went to Oregon. I told myself I was protecting my family. That was partly true. He paused. It was also partly that I couldn't stand to be in that valley and see what Hayes was doing, and know I was part of how he got away with it. His jaw tightened. My son will tell you I haven't slept through a night without waking since 1882. He'll tell you because he's been living with it too. David Voss, standing near the doorway, said nothing. His expression confirmed everything his father had said. Mr. Voss, Clara said gently, what you're doing now is the thing that matters. He looked at her. "And who are you?" he said, not unkindly. "Clara Bennett," she said. "I've been helping manage the Callahan estate documentation." He studied her for a moment. "You found my letter," he said. "Yes." "In the box?" "Yes, at the bottom." He was quiet. "Robert kept it," he said. "He did," she said. "He kept it for 13 years. He believed it had value. He was right." Thomas Voss looked at Ethan. "Your father was the most stubborn, honest man I ever knew," he said. "He wouldn't make a deal with Hayes when Hayes was offering good money for that lower pasture back in 1878. I remember thinking he was a fool. Thinking just take the money, let the man have the land, what's the difference?" He shook his head. "He said to me, 'Some things aren't about money, Tom. Once you let a dishonest man think he can buy his way to whatever he wants, you've taught him something he won't unlearn.' I didn't understand it then. And now," Ethan said. Voss looked at him steadily. "I've spent 30 years watching Hayes do exactly what your father predicted," he said. "I understand it now." There was a long quiet in the room. "I'm going to tell them everything I saw in 1879, Voss said. "Every detail. What Hayes said, what Crane said, what they were planning to do with that fraudulent survey. I wrote it all down 6 months after it happened, because I was afraid I'd convince myself it wasn't as bad as I knew it was." He tapped the side of his head. "It's all here. 30 years, and it hasn't moved." Ethan looked at the old man in the chair. He looked at him the way Clara had come to recognize the look that was more than gratitude, but quieter than it should have been for the size of what it meant. "Thank you," he said. "That's not enough. But thank you." Voss shook his head. "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank your father for keeping the letter. And thank whoever it is." He glanced at Clara, who thought to read to the bottom of the box. The hearing began on a Thursday morning. The territorial courthouse in Helena was a stone building with high windows and the particular gravity of a place where serious things had been decided for a long time. Aldrich was already when Ethan and Clara arrived along with James Aldrich and a third lawyer from the firm whose name Clara had learned was Whitfield. Hayes arrived 5 minutes later with Greer and 2 other men Clara didn't recognize. Hayes looked at Ethan when he came through the door. He did not look at Clara, which told her he'd made a calculation about her that was going to cost him. The judge was a man named Harlan Briggs, no relation to Nora, though Clara had asked who was approximately 60 years old and had the expression of someone who had seen a great many things in this courtroom and was not inclined toward drama, however inclined toward precision. That became clear within the first 20 minutes when Greer attempted to introduce the forged promissory note into evidence, and Judge Briggs stopped the proceedings to ask a series of questions about the note's provenance that were so specific and so relentless that Greer visibly sweat through his collar before he finished answering them. Aldrich did not smile. But Clara, sitting in the gallery behind the bar with her hands folded, felt something very quiet and very satisfied move through her chest. The federal document examiner testified first. He was a compact, neutral-voiced man named Ferris, who had the manner of someone who cared only about what could be demonstrated and not at all about the drama surrounding it. He placed the promissory note and the authenticated survey letters side by side, and explained in technical, and then in plain language, exactly what Clara had seen in the signatures, the completion versus the release of the R, the pressure inconsistency, the evidence of a practiced reproduction rather than a natural hand. When Greer cross-examined him, Ferris repeated his findings with patient precision and did not adjust a single word of them. The forged note collapsed in the room like a structure with no foundation. Then Aldrich introduced the record of intimidation. Clara's ledger pages copied and dated every fence cut and credit refusal and rumor documented with names and times. He read sections of it aloud, and the room was very quiet, and Judge Briggs made notes. Then Thomas Voss testified. He came in on his son's arm, moving slowly, and sat in the witness chair with the careful arrangement of a man who was in some pain and wasn't going to let it show. He stated his name and his former residence in the Valley and his current residence in Portland. He stated the date and the location of the meeting he had witnessed in 1879. He stated the names of everyone present. He described what was said. Hayes's proposal. Crane's agreement, the specific discussion about adjusting the survey markers on the eastern boundary. He described his refusal to participate. He described Hayes's subsequent decision to call in his debt immediately after which forced the sale of his property. He spoke for 40 minutes. His voice was steady throughout. He did not look at Hayes. Hayes at the opposing table was very still. Greer's cross-examination was brief and unsuccessful. Voss had spent 30 years remembering this. There was nothing to shake. When Voss finished, and his son helped him back to his seat in the gallery, the room was so quiet that Clara could hear the scratch of Judge Briggs's pen. Aldrich stood. He argued for 20 minutes, clean, structured, irrefutable. The original 1871 survey was valid. The 1879 survey attempt was documented fraud. The 1882 filing and all subsequent claims were built on that fraudulent foundation. The promissory note was a forgery. The pattern of intimidation demonstrated conduct unbecoming of a party seeking equitable remedy from the court. He sat down. Greer argued for 40 minutes and accomplished nothing except to make the contrast between the two presentations more visible. Judge Briggs said he would deliberate overnight. The overnight was the hardest part. Ethan didn't sleep. Clara knew because she didn't sleep either, and at some point past midnight she heard him in the room next to hers. Just movement, not pacing. Just the quiet restlessness of a man waiting for something that mattered too much to wait for comfortably. She thought about knocking on the wall. She decided against it. Some waiting you do alone, and some waiting you do together. And she could tell from the quality of the silence that this was the alone kind, not because he didn't want her near, but because he needed to stand in it by himself. For the same reason, a man climbs the last stretch of a mountain alone, even when someone has been beside him for the whole ascent. She lay in the dark and thought about everything that had led to this room in this city on this night. A general store in Red Hollow, a gold coin on a counter, a canvas bag and 40 cents and a set of conditions, a locked box on a shelf that no one had read all the way through in 6 years, an old man in Portland who had been waiting 30 years to tell the truth. She thought about her mother's voice saying, "Discernment is what keeps you alive." She thought about what it meant to have ridden north into the mountains on a borrowed horse and found at the end of that road not just a legal case or an estate in trouble or a man who needed help, but a valley that felt like somewhere a person could belong. A house that felt like somewhere a person could live. A man who looked at her like she was exactly who she was and wanted precisely that person. She closed her eyes. She let herself feel the full size of what she hoped for, which was something she had not allowed herself to do in a very long time. And then the sun came up, and she got dressed, and she went down to breakfast. Ethan was already at the table. He looked like a man who had been awake since 4 o'clock and had made his peace with it. He looked at her when she came in and said nothing, but he pushed the coffee toward her side of the table. She sat down and poured it and wrapped her hands around the cup. "Whatever happens today," she said, "we did everything right." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "Your father's name is clear regardless of the ruling," she said. "Ferris's testimony destroyed the promissory note. That's permanent. The court has heard it." "I know," he said again. "And Voss." "Clara," he said. She stopped. "I know all of that," he said. His voice was very quiet. "I know we did everything right. I know the case is solid." He looked at his coffee. "I'm not sitting here worrying about the ruling." She looked at him. "Then what are you sitting here doing?" He looked up at her. "Thinking about what I'm going to say to you when this is over," he said. "The case, I mean. When everything is settled and we're back in the valley and there's no emergency and no legal crisis and no reason for you to stay, except—" He stopped. "Except the one reason that doesn't have anything to do with any of that." The room was very quiet. "You've thought about it," she said. "For weeks," he said. "And," she said. He set his coffee down. He looked at her across the table with the same directness he'd had that first day in Owen Harding's store. The look that didn't flinch and didn't perform and didn't ask for anything except to be received honestly. "And I love you," he said. "I know that's fast by most measures. I know you came north on a trial with conditions, and this wasn't supposed to be—" He paused. "But I've been watching you work and listening to you think and sitting across from you at that table for 7 weeks, and I know what I know." He held her gaze. "I love you. And I want to ask you properly without a gold coin on a counter and a room full of people watching if you'll stay." Clara set down her cup very carefully. She thought about all the careful, measured ways she had been approaching this for 7 weeks. All the observations she'd been filing away. All the evidence she'd been weighing, all the systematic and reasonable accounting she'd been doing of what this was and what it might become. She let all of it go. "Yes," she said. "I'll stay." He looked at her. Just looked at her for a moment. "That's all," he said. "That's everything," she said. He reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her voluntarily without the occasion of helping her from a horse or passing a document, and his hand was large and warm and completely steady. She turned her palm up and let his fingers close around hers. They sat like that until it was time to go to the courthouse. Judge Briggs came in at 9 o'clock and sat and looked at both tables with the expression of a man who had made up his mind. He spoke for 12 minutes. The 1879 survey attempt, as testified to by Thomas Voss and corroborated by Voss's original letter to Robert Callahan, constituted documentary evidence of attempted fraud against the territorial land record. The 1882 filing and all subsequent claims based on a disputed boundary were therefore built on a fraudulent foundation and were dismissed in their entirety. The promissory note was confirmed as a forgery by the testimony of the federal document examiner and was stricken from the record permanently. The Callahan property boundary, as established by the 1871 Federal Survey, was confirmed and legally sealed. Victor Hayes was ordered to pay the full legal costs of the proceeding and was referred to the Territorial Prosecutor's Office for review of potential criminal charges related to the forged promissory note. Judge Briggs looked at Hayes over his papers and said in a voice with no drama in it whatsoever, "This court does not look kindly on the use of forged documents to cloud legitimate title. I trust the prosecutor's office will give this matter appropriate attention." Hayes said nothing. Greer was already packing his case. Ethan sat very still at the table. Clara in the gallery had her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the judge, and she didn't move until Briggs stood, and the room stood with him, and the gavel came down, and it was done. Then she exhaled. Aldrich turned and found her in the gallery and gave her a single small nod, the nod of a man who has won cases before and knows better than to celebrate loudly, but is not above acknowledgement. She nodded back. Ethan turned from the table. He looked at her across the room. He looked like a man who has just set down something heavy, not collapsed, not undone, but lighter in a way that changes the whole posture. He looked like himself. The version of himself that had been underneath the 4 years and the legal war and the solitude and the grief. She stood up. He crossed the room to her. Thomas Voss was in the corridor outside David, steadying him with a hand at his elbow. When Ethan came through the door, the old man looked at him and waited. Ethan crossed to him and took his hand again, the way he had at the boarding house with both of his. "It's done," Ethan said. Voss nodded slowly. His eyes were bright. "I know," he said. "I heard." "You did that," Ethan said. "You came all this way, and you told the truth, and that's what turned it." "The documents turned it," Voss said. He glanced at Clara. "She turned it. I just said what I saw." "That's the whole thing," Clara said. "That's all any of us did, said what we saw." Voss looked at her for a moment. "Your mother would be proud of you," he said. He said it quietly with the certainty of someone who has no way of knowing that and knows it anyway. Clara felt something move through her that she wasn't going to name in a courthouse corridor. She pressed her lips together and nodded. "Thank you," she said, "for coming." He patted her hand once. Then he let his son steer him toward the door and the light outside. They rode home to the valley 3 days later. Aldrich had paperwork to finalize, he always did, and there were documents to sign and copies to file, and Clara spent 2 of those days in his office, making sure every piece of the record was properly organized and stored, because that was the kind of thing she did, and she was not going to stop doing it just because the immediate crisis had passed. On the second evening, Aldrich's son James sat across from her with a cup of coffee and said, "My father wants to offer you something." She looked at him. "What kind of something?" "He needs someone to manage his client documentation," James said. "He's been saying for 2 years that the filing system is a disaster, and he can't find anyone with the right combination of organizational instinct and legal comprehension to fix it." He paused. He said, and I quote, "That woman rebuilt a 30-year fraud case from a locked box in 4 hours. I'd like her to rebuild my filing system." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Tell your father I'm flattered," she said, "and that I have other plans." James Aldrich smiled. "I'll tell him," he said. "He won't be surprised." She rode home. The valley was still and golden in the September light when they came over the ridge and down through the pass. Ethan stopped his horse at the same point where he'd stopped on that first evening, where she'd seen the valley for the first time, and the distant rider, and understood that she'd ridden into something more complicated than she'd bargained for. He stopped and looked out over what was his, what was cleared and confirmed and sealed by the court, and she stopped beside him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Your father built this," she said. "Yes," he said. "And kept it," she said. "Even when it was hard." "Especially then," he said. She looked at the valley, the cattle, the fencing, the buildings, the creek running low but steady in the dry summer, the peaks rising above it all in the particular blue of a Montana September. She looked at all of it and felt for the first time since she'd arrived that she was looking at it as something that was also hers. Not in the legal sense that would come in its own time, but in the sense that mattered more. She had fought for it. She had found the letter at the bottom of the box. She had named Aldrich in a yard full of Hayes's men. She had written the ledger pages and sent the letters and sat at the table and done the work. She had made herself part of this place by the same method her mother had taught her, not by waiting to be invited, but by being useful and true and present until belonging stopped being a question. "Let's go home," she said. Ethan looked at her. He smiled, the real one, the unhurried one. "Yes," he said. "Let's." They rode down together into the valley, into the last of the afternoon light, and Nora was on the porch when they came through the gate, and she looked at their faces and said nothing at all, because she had always known how this was going to go, and had simply been waiting for the two of them to catch up. A year later, on a summer afternoon that smelled of grass and warm timber, Ethan Callahan stood at the fence of the north pasture and watched his wife moving through the kitchen garden with the focused, unhurried manner of a woman who is exactly where she intends to be. She had reorganized the estate ledgers 3 months after the hearing. She had written to Harrison Aldrich every quarter with updates on the property's legal standing, and Aldrich had written back with the manner of a man who had gained a colleague whether he'd asked for one or not. She had made friends with Bridget Dolan and Ruth Mercer, and established without announcing it a kind of informal record-keeping agreement with 3 other Valley families who had learned what she'd done with Hayes's fraudulent filings and wanted someone with her eyes on their own documents. She had made Nora's kitchen her own without displacing Nora from it, which was a diplomatic achievement Ethan privately considered more impressive than anything that had happened in the Helena courthouse. And she had stayed. Every single day she had stayed, not because she had nowhere else to go, not because the 40 cents and the rented room had left her with no choices, but because she had looked at this valley, and this man, and this life, and decided with the same clear and careful discernment her mother had taught her that this was the right place to be. He had told her once in the quiet of an evening after Nora had gone to bed that he'd been afraid the whole thing had started wrong, that the gold coin and the practical need and the desperate timing had corrupted the foundation of what grew between them. She had looked at him and said, "The foundation is what we built after the coin, not the coin itself." He had no answer for that. He never did when she was right. He watched her now in the garden, and she looked up because she always knew when he was watching, which he had stopped finding uncanny and started finding simply true about her, and she said from across the yard, "Stop standing there. Come help." He pushed off the fence. He crossed the yard. He came to stand beside her in the same way he'd stood beside her in front of Hayes's men, and in front of a territorial judge, and in front of an old man in a boarding house corridor, because that was what they were, and what they had always been from the moment she walked out of Owen Harding's store and laid down her conditions and refused to be a woman who could be bought. Partners. In every sense of the word. She handed him the basket without looking up. He took it, and in the warm summer quiet of Callahan Valley, with the mountains holding the light and the creek running steady below the pasture and the life they had built together, spreading in every direction around them, Clara Bennett Callahan understood something her mother had told her once and she had carried without fully understanding until now. A good life isn't given to you. It isn't rescued into existence. It's built one honest day at a time beside someone who shows up for the work. She had shown up. He had shown up. And the valley which had been one man's inheritance and then one man's burden had become what it was always meant to be. A home that two people built together. And that was the kind that lasts.